Because in our first world, we talk about the effects of bromate and these things like this, but arsenic is a very deadly substance, and it's all over the world in high concentration, so I think this is important. So our next speaker is Doris van Halem, and it's Arsenic Technology Research Crossing Borders and Disciplines. So will you please come up? We'll hear her favorite song, which I don't recognize, but maybe that's good.
Thank you. I thought of not walking too fast, otherwise it's such a short introduction, musically wise. This was Angelique Kidjo. She's a singer from Benin, and in Benin is where my water career started. So there are also bars in Benin, slightly different from Berlin, but so that is where it started for me. Well, it's really nice to be here. So as my students would say, super nice to be here. I think I'm honored to be here as a plenary speaker for all of you in this room. And I want to take you on a journey on the research we've done the past years related to arsenic technology, both in the Netherlands and in Bangladesh. So I'll start with introduction, some content, and end with conclusions. And well, actually I will end with a small do-it-yourself filtered video that my students made. So what is arsenic? I'm quite sure in this room most people have heard about arsenic and that it can be a problem in water. Well, let me just be very clear. Arsenic is extremely toxic. It's been used as a rat poison in the past. It's been used in wallpapers because it colors nicely green, not realizing that children lick everything, also wallpapers. So there was a huge issue with children dying because of licking the walls. But now we're talking about acute arsenic poisoning. If we talk about drinking water, it's the chronic exposure that's important, at micrograms per liter. And in my presentation, I'm focusing on the contamination that occurs naturally in groundwater. It can also occur because of mining activities, it can occur because of geothermal influence. In my research now, for this talk, I'm focusing on the groundwater arsenic. Arsenic occurs in reduced aquifers, anaerobic aquifers, and doesn't come alone. Often there's ferrous iron, manganese too, ammonium in the water as well. And as I said, we talk about chronic exposure. It takes years to develop an illness, even at high concentrations. So the most famous example, unfortunately, of arsenic poisoning is Bangladesh. On the left for you, you see the first survey that had been done by the British Geological Survey alongside the government in Bangladesh, DPHE. And they investigated over 3,000 wells in the country to assess the scale of the problem. And it clearly shows that the wells that are red are over the national guideline, the orange ones are over the international guideline of the World Health Organization, and the green ones are good, that the scale of the problem is big. On the right, there's another survey, almost a decade later, where they sampled not the direct wells, but the water containers of which people were drinking. So this is the true drinking water survey, and over 20,000 samples were taken. It shows a different map, but it also shows that still between 50 and 60% of the population doesn't have access to safe water, mostly related to arsenic. Having said that, the intervention of moving away from surface water towards groundwater has been a huge hygienic jump in the country. Before people were drinking from the ponds or the local rivers, meaning a lot of problems with the child deaths. And so there is a new problem now, but I want to point out that this problem, if you look at the DALIs, is smaller. I made this presentation obviously before today, but the knowledge gap has been raised, and apparently I knew about this, because I think there is a huge technology gap. So if we go to a village, for example in northwest of Bangladesh, where we are working now, close to Rajshahi, people have access to water. So there's a hand pump in most of the premises. However, it's often not known whether the water quality is good for drinking or not. So when you decide to drink this water, you are at a high risk of exposure, whether you have arsenic or not. The risk is there. The other option that is locally available is bottled water. So there are bigger 5-liter containers available for about 60 taka, which would, if you recalculate it, €2, I should have made it pounds maybe, but it would be about 100 euros per cubic meter. Well, that's huge, that's expensive for anyone, so particularly in the village. So we can do this better, right? We know there are many technologies, but I have seen that most of the technologies that are available, either membrane-based or adsorbents or oxidants, that they are just not available within the local markets in Bangladesh. Meaning that there's a huge demand for innovations, for local innovations, innovations that suit the context in which they have to sustain. So why crossing borders? I'm obviously not from Bangladesh myself, although I did my PhD research there, so I've been there since 2007. But I was doubting whether I should put up this slide, because the differences couldn't be bigger. In Bangladesh, as I said, the concentrations of arsenic are really high, over the milligrams per liter. Whereas in the Netherlands, we have a few locations almost reaching 30 micrograms per liter, which is below the guideline in Bangladesh. The national standard in Bangladesh is 50 micrograms per liter for drinking water, whereas in the Netherlands we have just adopted a new target, which is to go under 1 microgram per liter. And then the people at risk of exposure over 10 micrograms per liter, which is the WHO guideline, is tens of millions in Bangladesh. Estimations vary here and there, and in the Netherlands, let's be honest, it's none. Nevertheless, the research aim is quite similar, because in the Netherlands we rely a lot on aeration filtration systems. To give a long introduction on arsenic removal technologies, but just to be very short, there are two groups. Groups that rely on pre-oxidation of the arsenic with a strong oxidant, for example chlorine or permanganate, for subsequent removal of the arsenic 5, the arsenate, which is charged, so you can remove it with coagulation or ion exchange resin. Other group of technologies are specifically targeting arsenite, so the reduced form of arsenic in the water. So for example, there are adsorbents around, and there are also membrane barriers that can be used for it. In my presentation, I want to show that we don't need these technologies. Of course we can use them, but the past has shown that it's difficult to adopt them in Bangladesh, and I think we can do without for most water types. Because the groundwater carries the main ingredient required to remove arsenic from the water. It carries ferrous iron. If ferrous iron comes in contact with air, it will oxidize to form iron 3+ and iron oxides. These iron oxides are perfect sorbent bases for arsenic. However, as I mentioned before, we have the reduced species in the water, which is uncharged, more difficult to remove with iron, and we want to have the oxidized form of arsenate in the water. This is where the problems start. Because if we aerate the water, the groundwater, the redox potential, the EH, will go up. So will the pH, because we sparge out the CO2. And hydrospheric oxides, so these iron oxides, HFO, will form. And you would say that we also oxidize arsenic. If you look at the, I'm sorry, I didn't make it myself, this graph, but the EH-pH diagram, you would say, yes, we will form arsenate as well. So perfectly, we can remove them together. However, arsenic oxidation, it's really slow. If you just add air, you can wait for a week before it's all oxidized. Whereas you all know iron oxidation at neutral pH, it's really, really fast, seconds or minutes. So if we simulate this aeration of the groundwater in a simple jar beaker experiment, where we combine different concentrations of iron as well as different concentrations of arsenic over the relevant pH range for us, you can make a really nice overview. In this overview, you see on the left, it's arsenic 5, which is the oxidized form arsenate. And on the right, you see the arsenic removal as arsenic 3. And if we zoom in further, in the iron range that is of our interest, between 0.5 milligrams per liter of iron all the way up to 5 milligrams per liter iron, well, the left is greenish, meaning that it's removing arsenic over 80%, whereas on the right, where it's the reduced form, it's all reddish. So it's clear, if you just aerate the water and you do nothing else, you will only remove a fraction if you have the reduced form of arsenic, and you remove a whole lot if you have the oxidized form of arsenic. But you don't have that if you just aerate the water. So moving to the Netherlands, the situation that we have there. The treatment plants in the Netherlands, the groundwater treatment plants, often rely on aeration filtration. So here there are two setups: spray aeration, filtration, cascade aeration, filtration. Sometimes it's just aeration filtration, one step. And what we were interested in is to see what happened to arsenic also in the filter bed. Because if you just aerate, you still have arsenic 3 left that enters your bed. And what we saw, that arsenic is hardly removed in the filter bed. There is some removal, but not too much, a little bit depending on the design of the filter. Here you see the concentrations over the height of the filter bed, or the removal percentages for 3 different water treatment plants. And you see that the phosphate, iron and arsenic removal trend look more or less similar. And in the bottom you can also see there's manganese and ammonium removal in the same filter bed. What was particularly interesting to us is that we saw quite fast oxidation of the arsenic 3, so the arsenite, the reduced species again, to arsenic 5 in the top layer of the filter bed. For free, for nothing. But it was not removed. Arsenic came out as arsenic 5. So the first question we had, why is this arsenic being oxidized in the filter bed? And the first suspect we thought of was manganese oxides. Manganese oxides are known to be capable of oxidizing arsenic, and when we did a small lab study with manganese oxide we bought, that's the graph on the left, and the manganese oxides we took from a filter bed, we indeed saw really beautiful arsenic oxidation profiles. Not as fast as we would expect, but still it happened. However, as I said, in groundwater, arsenic doesn't come alone. There's iron 2, there's manganese 2. If you add those two to the same beaker, you do not get arsenic oxidation. It's completely hindered by the presence of iron 2 and manganese 2, who will be oxidized, by the way. So it's in our opinion, we're quite certain it's not the manganese oxide that do the job. So being civil engineers, we were not really looking forward to going in this direction, but we saw no choice of suspecting microbiology. I know that a lot of bioengineering experts in the room. We felt uncomfortable by moving in this direction, to be honest. But we saw now in many, many different systems that there are organisms that are doing the job for us, in groundwater, in surface water even, and they're not superbugs. That's what we thought first. No, they're just very ordinary groundwater native organisms that grow in any filter. I think also if you have filters at home, you might check it out. They might be there as well. So it's something that actually does happen for free already in the filters, but we're not utilizing it for removal. Because as you can see, even after 49 days of operation, the removal of arsenic has stabilized, so there's no more removal being achieved, even though it's fully oxidized in the filter. And what we found particularly interesting here is that after 28 days, this stabilization, and we showed it later in different experiments where we could measure over the height of the filter, shows that arsenic bacteria are moving up. So initially, when you just start up a filter, it is over the whole height of the filter, that's the top one, and then after several weeks, the arsenic oxidation will happen fully in the top layer of your filter bed. And it moves faster than ammonium oxidation and manganese oxidation, by the way. So what do we know now? So if we would simulate aeration filtration in a column setup, and we would plot iron, we would have first iron 2 plus in the top of the system. Upon aeration, there will be fast oxidation of iron 2 to iron 3 and immediate formation of HFO, these iron oxides. And then they're removed in the top layer of the filter bed, depending on the filter media. If it's a sand filter, for example, in general, the top layer is where the iron is removed. So if we look at arsenic now, the profile looks different. You get some co-oxidation when iron oxidizes, we know that. So there's partial oxidation removal of the arsenic. But then nothing happens until the water reaches the filter bed, where you also get oxidation, the microbial oxidation, and partial removal. But there's still residual arsenic 5 in the drinking water. So, we can do this better. Now knowing the ingredients of our system, can we engineer it as such that we enhance the removal that you can achieve with the iron available in the water? There are several moments where you can intervene. You could enhance the co-oxidation and the removal with iron, therefore. You could stimulate the biological arsenic oxidation. And you could increase the absorption of arsenic S5 onto the HFO deeper into the filter bed. Well, as the starting point of our study, we didn't look at the arsenic, but we focused on the iron, because that is the sorbent. And we wanted to delay the iron to oxidation for it to be available once arsenic was oxidized. And we wanted to promote HFO mobility over the filter bed to make sure that you don't just have sorption potential at the top of your filter bed, but also deeper into the filter bed. Because I thought it would be nice to show you. So this is the theoretical gain that can be achieved. If you look at the micrograms of arsenic, it can be sorbed onto the per milligram of iron, whether it is arsenic 3 or arsenic 5. This is now not being utilized if you just have aeration filtration. So our task for engineering is to stimulate arsenic adsorption onto this iron while promoting the oxidation, preferably biological. So we developed a few solutions for this. One is the biological triple bed filter, is how we called it. It's a relatively simple filter actually. It's like a dual bed filter, you also mentioned, but then triple. So we have very coarse media, anthracite on top, sand, coarse sand in the middle, and then garnet sand in the bottom, so we can backwash it easily. And as you can see, the iron profile moves further deep into the bed. So the dark dots is the triple bed, whereas the open dots is the single bed. And then there's the question, will arsenic follow? And yes, arsenic removal follows over the full height of the filter bed, meaning that we achieved the new target of 1, more or less. We were quite happy with it. Things you can play with, for example, reducing the pH slightly will enhance arsenic sorption on the HFO. What I find particularly interesting is we also tested the supernatant water level, that's on the right. On the top we had a really low supernatant water level, so that's the water on top of your filter if you have a saturated filter. And on the bottom we increased the supernatant water level to 1 meter 20. And what you do then is you stimulate homogeneous iron oxidation over heterogeneous iron oxidation, meaning that you form flux that are more mobile in your filter bed, which you can see on the left where the iron is plotted, ending indeed with a lower arsenic concentration in the end. Again, concentrations differences are small because this was a pilot site at Pitspa in Belgium. Unfortunately, they don't have high arsenic. But we also go to Bangladesh. This is Kajul. Kajul is a PhD student, and the research we're doing in Bangladesh is in the region where he's originally from. And he's investigating how to use these insights for a system in Bangladesh. And what we did is we wanted to delay this iron oxidation, and we decided to do it with anoxic storage prior to aeration filtration, because at low EH and without aeration you would not have a pH increase. This would reduce the iron oxidation, together with the promotion of HFO mobility in a dual bed and a higher supernatant water level. Well, the setup in Bangladesh looks really nice. Yeah, so normally you have these rusty PVC columns, but we collaborate with industrial design engineers, and they found a rickshaw artist available to make this for all of our filters. Really nice. The color makes it And the PhD candidate is still digesting the results, but I thought I would share them with you anyway, because I think they're spectacular. So if you have an aerated system, just plain aeration, filtration, you remove your iron rapidly during oxidation, as I said before. So all the iron plots, they overlap for either sampling in the storage container or before and after the filter. However, if we have no aeration, we call it anoxic storage, but I suspect there's some oxygen contamination in our system, because we do get iron oxidation already on day 1, but only partially, which is really nice, what we wanted. And the iron is not removed in the storage container, but is removed after aeration. And as a consequence, in an aeration filtration system, we go to about 300 micrograms per liter to 140 micrograms per liter. So initially there seems to be better removal, but I suspect absorption on the sand we were using, which is just natural sand from there. So the removal is just over half of the arsenic. Whereas if we have a system where no aeration has occurred, we reach 40 micrograms per liter, which is a huge increase. And I think we can even do better, but this is a really nice start. Yeah, but does this fill the technology gap, eh? So I think every story needs to have a head and a tail. I don't know. I think this is a big jump still ahead, But what I do like is to experiment and see what we can do with these process-related insights towards design of a system that could be applied. And if we may dream, the theoretical removal of arsenic-3 with iron, if you look at the arsenic-iron concentrations that have been measured in the BGS study, the map would look like this. Slightly different than the earlier map, but it's difficult to find the differences. And if we would work with a system where we optimize iron removal, co-removal with arsenic, it looks like this, meaning that instead of 65, 95% of the wells in Bangladesh can remove arsenic just by relying on the iron in the water. So there's a dream. What's next? Well, what's important is to know, of course, where's the arsenic, but also where's the iron in the system in order to start constructing filters, whether it's central or decentral, doesn't matter. So what we tested was an iron test strip app. It's an existing app where an iron test strip is combined with the ACFO app. Maybe some of you might have used it as well. It's inexpensive, easy to use, so we had it used by end users themselves. And we wanted to generate with that crowd data. But does this crowd data beat the inaccuracy of a test kit like this used by untrained people? Well, we did this study in India and in Bangladesh. I'll focus on the Bangladesh data here. In this map, it's just the ICP-MS data for arsenic and iron. And if you take a glance, you see immediately there's not a really strong relationship between the two. And you can also see in the false negatives that there are 26 out of 184 in our study area in Bangladesh. So at first glance, maybe this doesn't work. However, if you generate enough mass and the distribution of your false negatives is evenly through an area, through the villages geographically, for a screening tool it doesn't matter so much. So if you plot our data with QGIS, on the left you can see now the iron test kit results. And there are more or less 7 villages included in the study, and to the left, right, and all the way up, these villages are difficult to see because they're really small dots, hardly any iron. And then in the middle and in the bottom, there are also a few villages with really high iron concentrations. So just relying on iron, knowing that iron co-occurs with arsenic, you know where to go, right? And indeed, if we plot our arsenic data on top of these test kit data, you get a really nice map. So I would say, even though this relationship between the two is not perfect, as a screening tool for local governments, it can work really well, as well as empowerment of people, so they can test their own well, showing to the government that we have an issue potentially in our village. So, conclusions for practice. Yes, it is possible to enhance the removal of arsenic with naturally co-occurring iron. With simple engineering tools, apply a coarser filter media, operating a higher supernatant water level, maintaining a lower pH, and anoxic storage prior to aeration. But in Bangladesh, there's the need of clever well screening, as well as social design. Maybe co-creation, you've heard of it, it's key in the working in villages like this, in the international context, but also difficult because amongst engineers, it's logical you co-create, but if we talk about end users in a village, how do you co-create with them? They are your customers, in a sense, or the customers of your local partners, at least. So what I thought would be really nice to do in our study is to design a design challenge. And I asked my colleagues of industrial design engineering, based on the processes we identified, anoxic storage, aeration, dual membrane filtration, we had dual membrane filtration, or dual media filtration, to design a filter that should be constructed just with local crafts and materials from the village. So no external machinery, no external materials. In the end, they were allowed to have a few fake Festo tubes, connectors from Dhaka, which cost 50 cents. I want to get rid of those in future designs. The filter should be really cheap, produce enough for a family or more. And they added their own criterion, is that they should be able to construct it in 3 hours. So my own civil engineering students always just spit out data, the slides I just showed you. But these industrial design engineers, they keep a blog. And I want to show you a short fragment of this blog. I think because it shows in what kind of environment we work. It's a loud environment. But also to me it gives this grassroots feeling that I know this solution might not be the solution, but it's something that activates people, which I think is valuable. So there we go.
Ooh, and I'm feeling.
Hey everyone! Join us in a auto rickshaw, fully loaded actually. Hey, we are 3 hours of line and we are going towards Uttar Kazipara. We're each giving ourselves 3 different tasks to work on individually. Less light than expected and raining stuff. Done. Very good. 1 piece, 2 pieces. Tak. Kemudian kita Don't worry, why don't you say what you just told me on camera?
Okay, we have just done so many works in just less than 3 hours. We set up all the filtration system along with the frames and the pipings and pour the sand and aside the bar carriers, everything, cut the pipes, everything in just less than 3 hours, and I think it's a great success for us. Good luck to you.
Very good. Well said. So everything is installed. Tomorrow we are gonna be back for testing the water properly. The next one.
So this research being conducted under the Global Drinking Water Program at TU Delft. In this program we stimulate research outside of the lab, into the field, and we collaborate with our own students from TU Delft, but as you can see in the video, student in the country we are active. So Bangladesh is I do most of the work in Bangladesh, but also in Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and I have colleagues that work in Mozambique, for example. And we help by organizing the research and embedding it in the PhD programs we have. But we also sponsor through Lab in a Suitcase on the left. Very handy for students not to have to reinvent the wheel of how to analyze their water every time. And we have a Best Paper Award since this year, also being supported by IWA with the chief in the selection committee. And I want to end with a statement that actually came to me last week because one of my colleagues gave a presentation and he mentioned this, a former colleague I should say, Hans Reiling, hydraulic engineering professor. And he mentioned that an applicable solution is always multidisciplinary because in the real world, everything is multidisciplinary. And I like that because I feel that engineering disciplines are made up to make it comfortable for us to oversee the real world. It's just too complex. And of course it's good to be an expert in one of these disciplines. But I think being an engineer and wanting to develop technologies that can actually be applied and will work, you need to oversee all of these disciplines. Because it might be a fantastic chemical reactor, but if the hydraulics don't make sense, it will explode, right? So, and maybe even after seeing my presentation, we should, and maybe also the earlier presentations today, by the way, we should even include some other important disciplines like economics, governance, co-creation, social design. So is there an engineer 2.0? Aren't we over asking ourselves and our students to do all of this? Well, I think we're not. I think it's good to have a discipline, but also don't fear to get to develop yourself in the broader sense, and in that respect, develop applicable technologies. So, ending with my acknowledgements. No idea of the time, but.
Doing really